They are blaming inflation on the people who raised the prices. Again, that's why they redefined inflation, which is really an expansion of the money supply. They redefined that as rising prices because that way they can blame the greedy businessmen because they raised the prices. They got to print it, more inflation in order to forgive people's medical bills. But of course, what happens once the government...
In an era where inflation is spiraling and economic policies seem to defy logic, Peter Schiff dives deep into the real causes behind the rising cost of living. From the dangerous consequences of government spending to the inflationary impact of misguided policies, Peter challenges the mainstream narrative and exposes the true culprits. What does the future hold as these inflationary pressures continue to mount? Stay tuned as Peter Schiff unravels the economic myths and reveals what's really driving the crisis.
In fact, it'd be interesting if I can have a conversation with Kamala Harris. What I would ask her, I'd say, Kamala, can you tell me what it is about communism that you don't like? I'd be interested if she could come up with anything about communism that she doesn't like and get her to explain it to me. You know, but this is the person who may eventually be president. So the housing policy is massively inflationary. Now, here's another thing that she proposed. A $6,000 credit for families the year they have a child. So the first year you have a child, you get a check for $6,000. Well, again, where's that money going to come from? The government doesn't have it, right? So again, it's got to be created. It's inflationary, right? You're creating money and you're giving it to people to go out and have babies. And, you know, some people might actually have the baby just to get the $6,000. So you might actually, change the birth rate a little bit if you're giving out $6,000, per kid, because that's how badly some people need money. But it's all inflation, right? She's supposedly coming up with a plan to stop inflation. She said, the cost of living has gone way up and I'm going to help bring it down. No, government is why the cost of living has gone way up. It's why all costs of living. The only economic system that lowers the cost of living is free market capitalism. That's what we need. We need to recreate that. You know, all she does is attack the symptoms of inflation, which are rising prices. But why do prices rise? Because of inflation. It's not greedy businessmen just decide to raise their prices. Their costs went up, and so they have to pass that on if they want to stay in business. Right? If they go out of business, then nobody can buy anything. It's the government. It's all the deficit spending under Biden. But not just Biden. It's Trump. It's Obama. It's Bush. The inflationary chickens are coming home to roost. But, they've been going out there for decades. Right? And now, right, we're seeing the consequences. None of these gimmicks are going to work. I've been warning about this on my podcast. I've been saying that price controls are coming, right? Nixon tried it. It didn't work. That doesn't mean Harris won't try the same thing or some other politician. They will, because you can tell in their rhetoric. They are blaming inflation on the people who raised the prices. Again, that's why they redefined inflation, which is really an expansion of the money supply. They redefine that as rising prices because that way they can blame the greedy businessmen because they raised the prices. If they were still defining inflation the way it used to be defined as an expansion of the money supply, how could you accuse the grocery store of expanding the money supply? They don't have a printing press. Once you understand the definition of inflation, you know exactly where it's caused. That's why the government doesn't want you to know what inflation is. They want you to believe that the consequence of inflation is inflation, so they can blame businesses for the price increases, even though they're the ones that bear 100% of the responsibility. Here's another inflationary proposal. She wants to forgive all the medical debt, right? So if you have a bunch of debt that you incurred for medical purposes, it's just going to be forgiven. You don't have to pay the money back. Well, where's that money going to come from? Because she's not telling the hospitals or the doctors, you got to forgive that too. Like, hey, you're not going to get your money. No. So the government is going to have to assume all of that forgiven debt. So instead of the people who borrow the money paying back their doctors, well, the government's going to pay everybody's doctors. With what money? Again, they got to print it. More inflation in order to forgive people's medical bills. But of course, what happens once the government sets a precedent of forgiving medical debt? Well, a lot of people take on more medical debt. Why not? You're not going to have to pay it back. And of course, debt is debt. So instead of borrowing money to, buy a car or buy whatever, I'll pay for that in cash and I'll take on more medical debt, right? I'll shift a bunch of debt over to the medical debt category so that I can have it forgiven, right? You create a moral hazard. You tell people you're not going to have to repay your medical debt. All of a sudden, people are going to take on a lot more medical debt. Maybe certain things that people would have said, I don't really need that. It's not really worth it. I don't want to borrow the money. Now they'll borrow it, right? And now the doctors will be able to tell the patients, look, I'm raising the price of this procedure, but don't worry about it. Just borrow the money and the government will pay it back for you, right? Now even the doctors or the hospitals are incentivized to charge you even more because they know you're not going to have to pay it back, and then you're not even going to object to it because you're not going to have to pay it back. So again, all of this, moral hazard, inflation, none of this is going to work. In fact, the other thing she wanted to do with medical debt, although she's planning on wiping it all out, so it seems like it's irrelevant, but she said that she wants to make it so that credit agencies, when they're, calculating your credit rating, that they can't take into consideration all of your medical debt. Like they have to pretend that it doesn't even exist. But it does exist, right? And so how can you not look at it? Because if somebody has a lot of medical debt that they have to pay, how could you ignore that if you want to see, if they're a good credit risk? Because the more debt you have, the less likely you are to repay. But if you're going to tell the credit rating agencies that they can't look at certain debt, well, then you're destroying the whole value of the rating. It's meaningless. And in fact, if they can say, well, we don't want you to look at credit card debt, well, what other debt do they not want you to look at, right? Do they want to make the whole credit rating completely meaningless so that, because once it's meaningless, now people are not going to be able to borrow money because the credit rating is supposed to help the lender have some confidence in making a loan. But if the ratings no longer mean anything because they're no longer legitimate because the government has said you can't count this, you can't count that, well, how do lenders, handle that? Well, they just don't make the loan at all. Fine, I won't loan, right? I don't want to risk losing my money if I can't quantify the risk with a legitimate credit score. So again, all of this stuff is going to backfire and make the problem worse. But the funniest thing too about this whole Harris plan is she wants to do all this great stuff. She's talking about all this great stuff I'm going to do if you elect me. Well, you're already there. You're already in office. Do some of it right now. Why you wait until January? Just go ahead and do it if it's so great. Can't you talk to Biden about it? Can't he adopt some of these things? Or can't you propose some of this legislation? I mean, at least, Trump is in office right now. So he can say, hey, if I was in office, these are the things that I would do. How is Harris going to talk about all this stuff she's going to do? She's there. Do something, right? Why wait, until next year if you've got this great plan?
As inflation continues to threaten our economic stability, it's crucial to understand the forces at play and prepare for what lies ahead. If you found today's insights valuable, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember, your financial future is in your hands. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.